Dominic, my friend, thanks for joining on
My
a
pleasure.
Tuesday night, I think it is, right? Yeah. Tuesday afternoon, your time.
Ish. Yeah.
Yeah, ish. Yeah. Let's talk Hollywood 2. Well, let's talk Hollywood 1.0 that you and your three generations before you grew up in.
Yeah. Two. Definitely
Two,
two, and then kind of three, depending on
kind
how
of
you.
three. Yeah.
Yeah.
The great grandfather that first got there, right?
No, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it was the grandpa that got there who got great grandpa a job in the studios.
Okay. So it's a little ishy. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
little.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So let's talk, let's just take some time to put on film or whatever the hell this is, right? It's not film, but the old equivalent, a conversation about Hollywood 1.0, where it came from, what it went through in your time and in, your father's and grandfather's time that you remember, and that they talked about, and how it was burned to the ground in just the last, what,
Last
12
years.
years, 13 years?
Yeah, 10, and then really accelerated with COVID, so
Yeah.
it's.
So 5 years, 6 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then maybe, well, not maybe, but we'll talk because we have been talking about, well, what is the Phoenix out of the ashes 2.0, because that actually needs to happen.
Sure.
So maybe tell us a little bit about the family's history in Hollywood. And
Sure.
and I don't mean Hollywood necessarily just as the industry, but as the place
Yeah, the
and
place.
the communities and et cetera. Yeah.
So, maybe a little bit of framing would be helpful first. Everything I'm going to talk about is really from a below the line perspective. So, blue collar Hollywood, right? We weren't
Yep.
producers or directors. You saw our names at the end of the movies, not at the beginning of the movies. So it's a different view. It's not the view of Hollywood parties and premieres and that kind of thing. It's it's an interesting thing to think about, but there are far, far more people, probably an order of magnitude more blue collar people in Hollywood than there are famous performers in Hollywood. If you watch a movie and you watch the opening credits with your actors and your writers and your producers and your directors, that's a dozen, maybe 2 dozen people. Watch the end of the movie, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So from my point of view, from my world, Hollywood is very much a blue collar affair and always has been. If you go look at old pictures of film sets from the 50s, 60s, people are there in suit and ties. They are, it was a very, um, it had a very shop floor feel to it in a lot of ways. Blue collar Hollywood is heavily unionized and has been forever. So it had a very particular culture. It was a very special collection of people and skills. Southern California, really didn't exist in any meaningful way until Hollywood. And then I think an important part of this story to add in later, and aerospace. Hollywood and aerospace came up in LA
But those
together.
crossed through
Oh,
Howard Hughes. Those
oh,
crossed through Howard Hughes. Yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah,
and
yeah.
the story of Hollywood is really the story of technological advancement in a very real sense. So you have an artistic drive, an artistic vision, and the tech won't allow it. And so there was this constant push, pull, back and forth, attack and defense dynamic all through Hollywood that drove different kinds of technologies in different eras, which allowed different kinds of storytelling. It's one of the reasons why you can really look at different eras of filmmaking and you can spot them in an instant. It's like, yes, they're stylistically different, but a lot of that stylistic difference had to do with the
Well, look at
technology.
the special effects, right? Look at
Oh,
the effects, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
at an even more fundamental level, like one of my favorite stories is Miami Vice only exists because Kodak created a film stock where Michael Mann could film at night and get those amazing night shots, right? Without that film stock,
Of that
Miami
Corvette that was made to look like a Ferrari. Yeah,
like a
sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, so
yeah.
like the whole story of, Hollywood is this really interesting study in tensions, right? So there's the technological drive and the artistic drive, their intention. Like just life on a film set is this odd tension between the director and the creative people who want X, Y, or Z to happen, and then all of us, the technicians, shall we say, who actually have to deliver that product. And every department is like that. It is even something like the costume department. You wouldn't think that the costume department is heavily involved in an action scene, but if you have someone getting shot and there's blood, or you're in a war and there's gear getting, they may have 10, 15 different shirts on standby with different layers and levels of blood as the story progresses, and so
Well,
every
let's
department is
let's add
that.
another piece there. They also had to do advanced material science because you had to have fabrics that would hang in certain ways and that would respond in certain ways to certain environments, and that could have, so there was, back to the pre-aerospace stuff, there was advanced material stuff that was going on in
Oh,
costuming and set,
absolutely.
the old original, the backdrop sets,
Oh,
etc.
so we'll get there eventually, but
Yeah, yeah,
my dad ran facilities for Warner Brothers, and there was
that's
this
right.
gorgeous old room. It was like 2 or 3 stories inside where they painted all of the old mats.
Oh,
And they had it was wired for a huge amount of electricity because the old arc lights had to shine light through it because they had to paint it as
oh.
it would be lit, right? And so, some of the most technically um, dangerous jobs in Hollywood until very recently were the electricians, because film sets required so much light to pump and
To
push
mask the
people
sun.
in,
To mask the
right?
sun.
Well, to
Oh.
mask the sun, and depending on the film stock that you're using, depending on, you build a house on a sound stage and it needs to be daylight, or it needs to push through a matte painting in a particular way. So
Well, that's
yeah,
actually what I meant by masking, is I meant it needed to replicate the sun. It
yeah,
needed to
replicate.
replicate the solar output, the luminous output of the
Yeah.
sun. Yeah, terribly
Or,
sorry.
or,
Yeah, yeah.
or sometimes even more. So when you're filming, for instance, in slow motion, you need way more light because the shutter speed is so fast that if you want to pick something up, you have to
Mm.
put just a huge amount of light in there. I did a slow motion on a handgun firing once, years and years ago, when the Phantom cams first put out, and they literally had multiple giant lights all coalescing in one spot, and I could only hold my hand there for a moment, and I couldn't see my hand. It was glowing white to fire that one shot, and then my hand had to come out because it was so hot. So okay,
Oh my
so
God.
back to your
Yeah.
original question. So there's this constant, technological back and forth at every level. And as technology advances, you tell different stories. And kind of my overall thesis, and I know we're jumping ahead, but my overall thesis is that CGI killed Hollywood, because it was the limits of the technology that forced you to be very good at storytelling within those limits. As soon as you could go into a computer and make anything you wanted, you removed the limits, and with those limits you removed, I think, really the driving force behind good storytelling. And like every movie you love has some version of, gosh, we really wanted to do it this way but we couldn't, and so we came up with this, and oh my god, it was genius, right? Like Jaws had an
So,
end, like
so,
Shark, it sank. It's like all that.
so do you think that Hollywood in its own way was driving advanced sciences
Oh, absolutely.
until
And
CGI, right? Until the computer era, right?
sure. Well, even into the computer era, I mean, some very large percentage of computer software writing visual was for the Hollywood market, right? They could afford it.
Yeah, and then the outspin of that was the video game world.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was
Which
the big
is
deal.
literally Hollywood, but it's just in game format rather than
Yeah,
going on the big screen. Yeah.
yeah. It's an interesting. Yeah, gaming is such an interesting storytelling environment, right? And look,
Yeah.
and gaming is going through exactly what Hollywood is going through right now. They're spending ridiculous amount of money on games no one's playing.
Yeah.
The video games went woke just like Hollywood went woke, and you can argue for all of the same reasons. And so yeah,
So do you
it's a
think so question, terribly sorry, I didn't mean to, but do you think maybe, and again, for anybody listening, Dominic and I have been talking about this for months and maybe a year or so in quite extensive conversations sometimes. So we're bringing you into the conversation now because we're trying to carry it forward, right? But do you think maybe the burning of Hollywood of an asset was because it, in some form or fashion, was no longer an engine of innovation in areas that could then be used in other ways to make billions and even trillions of dollars?
Well, I mean, look, Hollywood was a license to print money, right? It was a goose that laid the golden egg, but it's not a very good goose if you compare it to Google.
Yeah, but
From
I wouldn't say that's actually true because
from a strictly
think about
financial.
all the yeah, but it's okay. So Silicon Valley, I come from Silicon Valley, right? I'm a Silicon Valley kid, right? Um, even in my time, it's different now because now they just have like a 75% failure rate, 80% failure rate. They don't care. But even in my time, long ago, when that wasn't acceptable because we didn't have that much fake money in the system, um, even the best analytic minds, investors, had a 40 to 50% failure rate.
Well, so do
But,
movies.
well, that's what I'm getting at, right? But we didn't
Well,
care because, I mean, we did care on an individual basis, but collectively didn't care because even those 50% failures were moving technology, were moving opportunity, they were moving, the wealth creation capabilities of innovation forward. And so sometimes
right.
it was worth losing 50%. So I can't remember black skulls, et cetera, but it's, and again, I really can't remember the numbers right now, but in essence, 2% of your investments make back 90% of your returns,
Right.
and you invest in 50% of your investments are going to fail because they're going to set up the success for the other investments in the
Right.
form of the intellectual property, the intangible assets, et cetera, that they create. Well, Hollywood was that for a very long time in the
Absolutely.
form of material sciences, in the form of software development, technological software, um, reality creation kind of software.
Sure.
And then the other piece was the narrative crafting.
Sure.
And yeah, so terribly sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
And don't forget broadcast technology,
No, that's
audio,
right. That's right. The physical layer. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
and the consumer electronics, VHS tapes,
Yeah.
DVDs,
Yeah.
it was all being, everyone was a winner, in that story as that was being.
Yes. Yeah. So sometimes you'd create a show or a movie and you'd invest a lot and it didn't care if it failed because the intellectual property on all the different components of how it was created and how it was distributed, et cetera, were of more value to all the other things you were doing than that single individual intellectual property,
Right.
property itself. Right.
And think about it from an ecosystem point of view, right? Even your bad shows, well, you're training a crew, you're training people, who are learning the arts and the sciences around it. Writers are getting a chance to write, etc. And it's like, look, everyone's done bad shows. I've done
And
bad.
you're sharpening, you know, investors, producers and investors in the space as to how to pick winners,
Yeah, yeah, to the extent that that's possible, which is a funny story,
which
you
I
know.
think has changed a lot in your time, right? But
Oh, well,
yeah,
I mean, I think okay, yes, like things are crazy now, and things are, but there was this great documentary that came out a few years ago where they were talking to one of Steven Spielberg's early producers, and he's talking about this movie he made in the '80s called Clan of the Cave Bear,
oh, I remember it.
right?
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
and it let's just say it didn't do well. And he's talking about how, well, it was like a New York Times best-selling book for like years. I had Daryl Hannah right outside of Splash. She was the biggest, actress in America.
yeah,
And this movie came out, and this producer's telling the story decades later, and he says, and all my friends came to me and said, What's the matter with you? You can't make a 3-hour long movie, not in the English language, about a bunch of primitive people. What were you thinking? And then the documentary smash cuts to Kevin Costner riding over the hill and Dances with Wolves, which is a 3-hour long movie, mostly not in the English language, right? And so
So, you
the,
know,
the
my friend Peter Buffett wrote the song that he was dancing around the fire to.
really,
So,
no
Warren
kid,
Buffett's youngest son wrote the song
didn't
and
know
a
that.
couple of other songs, but particularly the one the dancing around the fire at the time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can take a failed movie or a TV show and explain in detail why it failed, and I will show you another TV show that did all of those same things better that
Or
worked,
or
right?
in this in the context of what I'm articulating, we could also show how the failure of that show in that network of people and companies actually benefited them in the
Oh,
other
yeah,
things that they were doing,
right.
or again in the context of advanced materials, in the context of
Sure.
image capturing, lighting, all these unbelievable technologies and solutions, and then broadcast and storage and all these things. All of that helped industries that weren't even Hollywood, weren't
Oh,
even the entertainment industry.
right? It's like a famous case of that is Gene Kranz, who went on to be head of flight ops for NASA. His original project was he was in charge of building all the global broadcast stations so that they could stay in continuous communication, and
Uh,
that was Hollywood-based technology. So, yeah, it was, they were joined at the hip. Like since World War II, Hollywood and the national security state were joined at the hip. Like to this day, aerospace has long left Los Angeles. I mean, there's a lot of death tech in El Segundo and like Long Beach, south of LA,
yeah.
but the Valley, where Hollywood really is, like you want to know where the best machine shop in the Valley is? It's in Panavision.
They're still around.
Oh yeah, Panavision is still around. They don't do right now because of the switch to digital, because it's a tech product.
Yeah.
Today they do mostly lenses, but there are still
Well, they
people who
used to
show.
do mechanics, they used to do the movements and all that. So there is a second still somewhat surviving portion of the tech space from Hollywood that had the crossover between Hollywood and aerospace. It's up in Santa Barbara.
What was it? I'm not familiar.
Well, it's mostly electrical side of things, the electronics, electrical engineering side of things, and
Got
the
it.
very advanced mechanical engineering side of things.
Got it.
But it's up in
Yeah.
Santa Barbara. Yeah. But
Yeah.
originally it came out of the same, Hollywood era, the Hollywood time, et cetera. World War II, actually a little bit before before World War II in Hollywood, because as we all know, Hollywood was propaganda central
Sure.
during, 30, 38, 39, up through the war and even after actually, and really, um, up through the Vietnam or portions of the Vietnam War, probably to the latter part of the Vietnam War. But a lot of these technological guys, there was crossover. I mean, again, Howard Hughes was a movie producer.
Good. We filmed Transformers 3 in the Howard Hughes hangars where they built this.
No
We,
way.
we were in that building for like 6 months.
Oh, no way. So
Mhm.
there's been this big crossover, right, between scientific advancement, scientific technological advancement, propaganda messaging and advancement, and the mob and the intelligence agencies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, someone might argue those are all the same thing.
They
with
might.
di- with
They
different
might.
with a modified org chart depending on. It's like, yeah,
The
one of my little favorite factoids is that John Ford, one of the greatest directors, did made all of John not all of but many of John Wayne's most memorable movies. He was the head of the OSS photographic. I forget the full title, but he was,
yeah.
deep into the OSS, as were so many people of that era. And when you look at the, immediate post World War II era, I once saw this amazing chart where it showed like all of the great actors of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and beneath it was their war record. And General James Stewart's 24-ish missions, over Europe, Ernest Borgnine, Lee Marvin, all of these guys. Captain Kangaroo was the beach master on Iwo Jima. It's like, it's just crazy. All of the people who, Sterling from Twilight Zone was walking down a beach on an island in the South Pacific in a safe area when a parachute failed to open and crushed and killed his best friend. That's why we have the Twilight Zone, right? So like all of these
Oh,
guys,
Rod Sterling, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that's to say those are the actors, and that's to say nothing of the crews, and so
Well,
Hollywood
I've
certainly.
said this. Yeah, I've said this to some Hollywood people. That are asking questions about where we are and what we're doing, etc. I was like, how many veterans of the 27 years of the GWAT do you have as writers? I just put it in that context because I'm a writer. So how many of them do you have as writers? If we look from the World War I period through in the late 1960s into the early 1970s, a lot of those writers were veterans.
Absolutely, absolutely. Walt Disney drove an ambulance in World War One, right? That's why Main Street USA looks like pre-World War One America.
Yeah,
That's what he was trying to get back to his whole life.
yeah, that's where he got stuck,
Yeah, so he
right?
got stuck.
And maybe that's not a bad place to be stuck back then, but
Probably.
it's okay. So give me 1 second. When did your family get to the Valley? When they get into Hollywood, and how did that all start, and then what got you into it, and why are you now still, albeit it's changed a lot, why are you still there?
Well, so Grandpa and Grandma came over on the same boat from Italy. Didn't know each other at the time and met later in Chicago, and moved to LA, I believe, in the late 30s. And then the war started, and Grandpa was a crane operator down at the ports of Long Beach, and loading ships to head overseas for the war effort. And funny you mentioned World War II propaganda. There was a film crew there in, I guess, like would have been 45, who was filming a war propaganda film showing the ships being loaded and heading out to
Yeah,
sea.
yeah, yeah.
And the camera crew wanted to see if they could put a camera, and cameras were very big and very heavy at the time. They wanted to do a long sweeping shot across the ship to make it look like the ship was in motion. And because it wasn't, it was docked. And so Grandpa worked with them and put the camera on the crane and worked with them to make a sweeping shot. And as the family legend goes, I wasn't there. Someone hands Grandpa a card and says, "Hey, if you want to not run a crane, come give me a call." And so Grandpa did, and in so doing lost his draft deferment, and he got drafted, and 2 weeks later the bombs were dropped.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that's how Grandpa ended up in Hollywood, and he knew a lot about building and construction, and so he ended up running construction at Universal for quite a while. When the lots were heavily unionized, he was deep in the middle of that, and he stuck around until the 70s. So he was there for quite some time. And my dad got into the family business. He started working in the 60s. His first job was shoveling horse manure on Gunsmoke because that show was on like 15 years. And that was a lot of people's first job in the industry. And he went on to be a property master. He was a property master on Moonlighting and a lot of different TV shows in the
Oh,
80s. And just for a reference for how quickly things change, I grew up in Woodland Hills, which is a suburb of LA, and my dad was shooting blank firing machine guns in our backyard, when I was a little kid because no one cared. Um, so yeah, you do that today and you've got some serious problems. But the LA of the 80s was significantly more rural, significantly more cowboy, significantly more.
we were
It,
red. We
yeah,
were
it
red.
was a pretty gosh darn red place, and you didn't have to drive
Yeah.
far to be in. That's crazy thing about Los Angeles for people who've just never been here is that you can be in downtown LA, and in 30 minutes of driving with no traffic, you can be in a mountain and see no human being for as far as the eye can see. LA is a
Yeah.
very strange place that way.
Yeah.
So,
San
so yeah,
Gabriel Mountains. Yeah.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
all kinds of neat stuff hidden up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, they said, yeah, they used to test, torpedoes up there in some of those dams and lakes during the war. So, yeah, and, so then me, originally wanted to be a doctor and went to college by the time I got my BS, I was really over the academic setting, and, thankfully, I had the family business to fall back on, so I started working in a, prop house called Independent Studio Services, which still exists, and, it was basically think about the Indiana Jones warehouse. It just goes on forever. It's like that, except it's filled with every object you can imagine. So if you're saying, "Hey, we're making a movie and a family is going camping in the 1950s," well, there's 1950 coolers, and you go down to the graphics department, and they'll make you beer correct for the period. And it was just a place. It was the ultimate library of things, and I got to spend several years there while I was going to college and after. And it was an amazing education because one week you would be building press cameras. So, hey, we're doing a photo shoot circa 1995. You would go into the camera room, which was a library of cameras. You would build an appropriate press kit for that time and era. And you would do that for every script that kind of came through the door, and you got a heck of an education in how a lot of things in the world worked. So I did that for a few years, and then I ended up weaseling my way down into the gun room, where I spent a little bit of time, and that was really most of my career. I was a property master and mostly an armorer, and I got very, very lucky hooking up with a great guy, a little bit older than me, whose kind of career was on a rocket ship. And we were the youngest prop gun crew in Hollywood in the early 2000s. And we just ended up doing a whole string of big shows until it came to a crashing end, right around 2019, 2020. I was very,
Not
very
because
lucky.
of Baldwin.
No, he did not help. He did not help. And and neither did the producers and the middle managers who hired that armor and never checked out her background.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. Not
the
to put
Hol
this on Baldwin, by the way, and not all to put this. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's a
yeah.
whole, we could talk about that, but that's its own like rabbit hole. But yeah, the Hollywood gun business, it I don't know what it is right this second, but at one point last year it was down 70% from its peak. And it's a business. You wouldn't think so, but you can go and look at there's videos of ISS on YouTube. You can go look at them. And yeah, they have 10,000-ish guns, but those guns rent, right? Those are work. That's not a museum. That's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
working place. And guns go out, they sell the blanks. It's a business. And after the Baldwin thing, yes, there are giant action movies and you rent a lot of guns on action movies, but you rent just as many guns going out to the police procedural this week that's having a little shootout, or the military show is having a Vietnam flashback.
Yeah.
It's those little 1 2. I made a pretty decent living for a time taking guns to the sets of soap operas, firing one blank and going home, right? And it's that side of the business that really went away because of Baldwin.
Mhm. So, talk to us about where you think in your life, your father's life, your grandfather's life, that Hollywood changed and the trajectory to its destruction began.
Sure. So Hollywood's been around for a long time, right? There's
Century.
multiple. So yes,
Yeah.
multiple generations have come in and out. There have been huge technological advances, and Hollywood weathered all of those pretty darn well. A lot of different political changes. At one point, Hollywood operated under the Hays Code, which highly limited what they could show. Some of your favorite 70s movies are when the Hays Code ended and a new generation of filmmakers could start telling completely different stories. So, you can look at the different eras of filmmaking and the different types of movies that were being made. They were always making good movies for the audience at the time. And even when they did risky things, most of those risks worked okay. And Hollywood and the writers, people, it's a blue collar community. Those are real people with real problems who are, really in the world. And so you write about things that touch everybody because
Yeah.
you're writing from a real point of view with a real perspective. And, you know, I think one of the big problems that happened was blockbuster movies. It's funny on my YouTube feed is just constantly like movie related stuff. And like a week ago, I started getting these videos that someone was making showing actors and how much they were paid through their career. And like someone like Harrison Ford, like he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars in his early career, right? He wasn't making millions of dollars until, the mid to late 80s. And then he wasn't making tens of millions of dollars until the 90s. So it wasn't until the blockbuster era that all of the costs, I think that blockbusters broke the business of Hollywood to a certain extent because before the blockbuster, you had to have a relatively smooth earnings curve. You'd have some dogs, you'd have some hits, but when you start having giant hits that start representing almost all of your income, well, that changes the risks that you're willing to take. And are you willing to fund as many smaller movies?
Well, and the
And
risk that the studios are willing to take because maybe 1 out of 10 of your movies is going to make back all the money for all 10.
right, for all 10. But
Yeah.
guess what? It doesn't take them long to figure out, well, why are we only making blockbusters? And that's why this summer all of the biggest movies are what? Toy Story, I think 5, right? Every major movie this summer is some sequel or a live action remake of an animated movie that did very well. So you're looking at the risk pro like this summer, go look at this summer's movie releases and it's dominated by existing IP. Well, why is that? It's because the financial incentives, you could argue that it's a degree of cowardice. You could argue that it's corporate now and decisions are being made by committee, where once upon a time decisions were being made by individual actors with strong or individual actors, and I don't mean like movie actors, I mean like players in the game who have strong beliefs about a particular script or about a particular whatever. It's like, look, love him or hate him, heart without Harvey, there is no Quentin Tarantino, right? Someone
Well,
had to say,
for me, the Harvey is Jimmy Stewart, and it's his imaginary 6 foot tall rabbit friend.
I'm not familiar with that one. Tell that
You
story.
haven't watched the original Harvey?
Mm.
You met Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, I meant Harvey Weinstein.
I met Harvey, the original Harvey, which
The
I don't know
original.
he's named after, but oh yeah, you got to watch the Jimmy Stewart movie Harvey.
Okay, I don't know
It's
that one.
brilliant. It's 1930s. I think it was before the war.
Before the
Yeah.
war.
Yeah, terribly sorry. Go ahead. You were talking. Yeah.
So just I think that the risk profile changed, and I'll tell a story that I think I've told this on Tommy's podcast, but um, I grew up on film lots, and so when I'm 3 foot tall, little Donnie, my my core memory of being on a of being on a film set are tool belts
I
because
remember you saying that. Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
building sets, tearing sets down. Again, it's a very blue collar environment. And and my career was weird. I didn't film on lots very often. I did a huge amount of location work, just chasing tax credits, and that's its own story. But like around 2012 or so, I was doing a series of reshoots for as a favor to a friend, and we were on the Sony lot, which wasn't very familiar with. And I was looking around, like it was just average day. People are hustling and bustling, going around and no one was wearing a tool belt. Everyone was in like, a button down and Dockers. And you're like,
So you're
wait,
talking about after the Columbia purchase, right? The Sony
yeah,
Columbia
yeah,
purchase. Yeah.
yeah. So 2012 ish.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, wait a minute, where are all the guys? Who's doing all the work? Right. It's like, oh, I see a bunch of people shuffling paper and doing emails and everyone's on the phone and looking very busy. But like, who's making the movie? And I think that what happened was, and there's a very interesting parallel to this, both in journalism and in publishing, it became a prestige industry, right? Your first job on the set is no longer like my dad was shoveling horse manure. Your first job is sending emails and, picking someone up in an Escalade from the
Carrying
airport.
coffee, go
Carrying
getting the coffees for some
going
executive. Yeah,
exactly, right? And
yeah.
so Hollywood lost a humongous amount of its blue collar flavor. And one of the major parts of that was the introduction of large numbers of production assistants. We call them PAs, and they get paid nothing. They get treated like garbage. And it takes several years of doing that before you advance into, most of them become assistant directors, but they end up lots of places. You know who can do that for a living? Rich kids, right? Because they're living at home or someone else is
Rich,
paying.
liberal arts educated Ivy League
It's
kids.
it's now I will
Yeah.
make a caveat to that, which is that I did a lot of filming in Atlanta, and the Atlanta PAs weren't like that. But just the fact that some very significant part of the crew went from paid blue collar to horribly paid intern for the experience, kind of positions, that was a huge part of the problem. Um, and then really the technology got so good. Cameras got smaller and lighter. The lighting changed to LEDs. You didn't need as much heavy cable or as many generators. Um,
You
and
also
so the
didn't need as much knowledge about angles and lightings and,
well,
electricity and all that other stuff. Yeah.
Netflix. If you want
Yeah.
to see where this ultimately goes, watch anything on Netflix. It all looks the same. All the faces are lit the same. Like, if you don't think that back in the day, actresses had very serious talks with the lighting techs about how they needed to be lit, like, no, but yeah, they did. And
Or
so,
the
but
studios had that conversation and they told the lighting and the camera angles and
camera
oh,
angle,
by the way, you had different heights between the actors, male and female actors, and right, like maybe
yep,
Ernest Borgnine or not Ernest Borgnine, but Humphrey. What is his name? Oh my God, Bogart was not as tall as right, and then
yep.
maybe some of the women or Alan Ladd maybe as well, and then some of the women they got to be actresses were under 4 feet tall, and yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. What really scared the crap out of everybody was when things went digital and HD,
Oh
because
yeah, and they can pick up the
what it
pores in the
what it
skin and
does,
the yeah,
scan.
yeah.
It changed makeup, it changed lighting, it changed all. So again, just the technology drives so many of these choices. And so as the filmmaking footprint got so light, well, now a show could very easily become a road show. And that meant that you could go to other states and chase tax
Uh,
credits. Once upon a time, cameras were so big and so massive. The cabling runs were so long and so heavy. There were so many lights that needed so much support that going on location was a big deal, especially if you were doing night shoots on location because you had to bring all that other stuff. As the packages and everything got lighter, well, now it becomes kind of a traveling circus kind of environment. And that would, to my mind, was really the death of Hollywood, because what happened was, and this is my career, this is what I lived. We would get a great job. You're making some major movie, maybe the biggest movie in the world, but you're making it out of state. And so they would say, okay, the prop master can bring you, you can come and you can bring two assistants. Everyone else you have to hire is a local. Well, that means that the locals there, that means that those positions in LA aren't getting trained. Right. And
and
so
they're
the
also not
children,
be able to sustain their life, and so they leave.
so they
So
leave.
even the trained ones are leaving because they can't earn an income anymore, a living
Yeah.
anymore.
That
Yeah.
and that's what's happening right now, is that the loss of talent is just stunning. And once it's gone, like, 10 years from now, they may say, hey, we want to bring back the 1990s Hollywood blockbuster. And we would just go, yeah, I don't know what to tell. Yeah, good luck. Good luck. Now, you can make a CGI monstrosity on a green screen, but that's not the same thing, right? It's like, um, it's very funny. Right now, there's a huge amount of nostalgia for 90s and early 2000s movies, because it's a glimpse into America before, all the
It's
crap that we,
reality into
yeah,
reality.
Yeah,
I,
it's a
you
different.
know, I released this YouTube channel using, AI, quote unquote AI generated
Right.
imagery, and spent a year putting it. I released one real video, me talking to Colonel Towner yesterday, and outdid the entire performance of that entire channel that we put a good amount of money into
Yeah,
because
it's
people want reality.
well, when you're surrounded by a whole bunch of non-reality, fake reality tunnels around every corner, you're looking for something real. I think
Something.
that
Yeah,
something
yeah,
something meaningful.
yeah.
Hollywood used to provide that to an extent. Yes, it was Simple Town, and yes, it was fantasy, and yes, it was escapism. But escapism doesn't mean you can say whatever you want. It means you have to tell a true story in a way that's better and a little bit more engaging, maybe than your regular
And you
life.
have to figure out how to present it in a way that you're drawing the person into it as if
Absolutely.
they were standing on the corner drinking a cup of coffee or a Red Bull or something.
Yeah, and the thing that scares the crap out of me right now, a producing friend of mine sent me that it was for a Korean. The Koreans are doing these super short, almost like TV novella type shows, but the instructions that they're giving the producers are like down to the minute of what needs to happen in order to hook people. And at this point, this, at that point, that. And so what you have
Dopamine.
is
It's dopamine addiction. It's literally dopaminergic system hijack.
exactly what
Fuck the
mobile,
Koreans.
right? Exactly what
Terribly
mobile
sorry.
phones do to
Uh,
us. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
we're
they're not
using them, by the way, to do this, right?
sure.
Yeah, terribly
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
So it's interesting to watch the Netflixes of the world, and look, they've made some good stuff. I'm not going to say they haven't. The issue, to my mind is, and I'll repeat this story. I forgot his name. He was Quentin Tarantino's writing partner early on in his career, and I heard this in a podcast a few weeks ago. He said he had just pitched at some major Hollywood studio and was going to go make his first ever pitch at like Netflix. And the Hollywood studios are magical places, but they were all made in the 20s and 30s and 40s. They're old. You go into a Hollywood soundstage, it's a dirty, old building. It's not like they steam clean them in between movies. So the place has a patina on it, let's say. And then he walks into Netflix and there's free food. There's
It's
beautiful
Silicon
coffee.
Valley. It's
It's
Silicon
Silicon
Valley.
Valley.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he said. He went to his friend and he said, "What the hell is this?" And his friend said to him, "It's not entertainment, it's tech." And if you understand that about streaming, right, this is not entertainment, it's tech. You might be entertained. There are still people
Well,
trying to make
it's
movies within that.
neuroscience. It's the confluence of
Yeah.
neuroscience and behavioral science in tech.
Yeah. But you know what? That will absolutely kill experimentation, right? And so you won't find the next major thing, right? It's like one of my big belief. I have wanted to do this for years. I have wanted to go get some venture capital and do nothing but search for the next Harry Potter / Star Wars young hero's journey story, because Star Wars is Gen X, Harry Potter is
Millennial.
millennial. We do not yet have a Gen Alpha story of that caliber, except for the one you wrote.
Maybe, but
Yeah, maybe.
we have to bring it into reality in a way that they connect with, and we also have to understand that while they're revolting against the artificial, they also, if you don't connect with them there in the behavioral neuroscience technological nexus manipulation,
Right.
then draw them into something that you're not going to get them,
Gonna get them right there. Yeah,
right?
all their dopamine sensors are fried.
Correct. Well,
You
I
know,
got one down the hall that we're battling out with, right? Daughter that I love dearly, but her dopamine system is burned out every minute of every day.
once upon a time, you had to be the king of England to burn out your dopamine receptors.
Actually,
Literally.
when the King of England was something real, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Not to
It's
take away from His Majesty the current king, which in
I,
my novel Azrael Burns has been maybe. Well, anyways, y'all go read it. Um, let's talk about let's talk about, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not seeing this right. But as a finance business guy and tech guy and a writer, um, I can't help but believe that Hollywood and the entertainment industry writ large was intentionally burned to promote this wokest ideology, which in reality is just red ant, black ant kind of warfare that, Alex Craner talks about. Um, from the inside, did you see that? Or if you did see it, how did it play out for you blue collar people who are the actual true Hollywood?
So depending on where you were, you either that was all you saw or you didn't see it at all. So
Mhm.
I was on the side to where I hardly ever saw it because big action movies with big action man
Mhm.
directors,
Like Wick and yeah.
yeah, Wick, but also like Flags of Our Father, like Eastwood. Like you're not putting,
Uh,
or Eastwood, Michael Bay. Those guys are not going to let you ruin their movie. Um, so I was in a little bit of a bubble, which was both great at the time, and now they don't make those movies anymore. So it had an interesting risk profile that I wasn't quite aware of when I made those choices. But I think that so there's a lot of things going on. One of them is that, when streaming happened, there was a brief period of time where production spiked through the roof, absolutely spiked through the roof, because you had not just the traditional studios and networks making their programs, you had the streamers making their programs. And the streamers were in a rush to make stuff. There was a period where they just couldn't make stuff fast enough. So Hollywood hiring was pretty well gate kept. Um,
of
it
course.
was not, yeah, it
Yeah.
was not at all unusual when I was a young man, when working in various places. Like the intercom would come on, and they'd have to specify junior, not junior or senior, because there were three people with the same name of the same generation working at the same time. And part of
That's a
that,
village, by the way, and that's
yeah,
historically accurate. That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
um that's the old guild system that actually built
Mhm.
the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, there's talent everywhere. You can get good at anything. There are things that you only learn when a parent and a grandparent are arguing over a Thanksgiving table about an experience. That
Yeah.
there's stuff
Yeah.
like that. So with that production boom because of streaming, all of those gates went away, and they hired just almost anyone they could get their hands on, and so in came this rush and because this is tech, they brought, shall we say, their San Francisco sensibilities to the hiring practices.
Watch it there.
And
Watch it there. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so I watched several. So like I came. It's very interesting, starting as young as I did. I watched some of those PAs go from PAs to producers. Right. Like as I was going through my career advancement, they were going through their career advancement. And once upon a time, they would be making movies right now and I'd be working for them. Right. Like that's what should have happened. Instead, what happened was, well, all of those guys were straight white males, and none of that, well, very few of them that I know of made that transition into the streaming world. And so I know many, many men of my generation who right now should be major producers making major action movies who aren't, who have left the building because they would pitch and pitch and pitch. And they never, just nothing funny, nothing that they pitched ever got made. Even when the material was pretty gosh darn diverse and
Well,
woke.
and the material that was funded failed again and again and again and again.
Okay, so you brought this up on a podcast, I think like a week ago, which I think explains a decent chunk of this, which is that, all of these producers and the powers that be are looking at their phone, and they're getting pushed stories and messages, etc. And so, yes, they are predisposed to look. In order to be a creative in Hollywood, you have to have high trait openness, right? One of the big five personality
And
traits.
innovativeness.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And but you also, on the flip side of that, have to have high trait conscientiousness. Otherwise, nothing gets done. And what happened was, I think they went 100% towards openness and missed that because if you didn't have that, get the crap beat out of you early part of your career, you didn't develop the conscientiousness. And so here are a bunch of people who didn't go through the gatekeeping and are being heavily manipulated by their technological, accoutrements, their phones, etc., who really, honest to God, one, they're predisposed towards wokeness and believing in that. And then their phone is telling them not only is that the right answer, everyone believes it, and everyone who doesn't is a
Oh,
racist.
and every cocktail party they go to, and every brunch,
Yep.
down in Bel
Giant,
Air, etc.
giant ecosystem, self licking lollipop,
Right?
right?
Because why? Because the way in which the innovative world works, the creative, innovative world works, is it's always listening.
Yeah.
It's always listening. And then it figures out how to package something that is the largest signal. But if that signal's fake, if that
Right.
signal's artificial, if that
Uh,
signal is in a echo chamber, then you
Yep.
wind up with failure. You wind up with artificiality. You wind up with things that are superficial and they just don't work. And I would say this more than anything else. The thing that fails about wokeness is that it's superficial. It doesn't
Sure.
have depth.
Nope.
It's not that it's without emotion. It's not that it's without emotional connection. It's not that it's not without some basis in story and narrative, but it doesn't have depth. And it doesn't have depth because it doesn't connect with enough people across enough, this of the spectrum of human experience.
Yeah, and if you took a woke character and actually went deep on them, their wokeness would soon become the least interesting aspect about them. And now it's not a woke story anymore, it's a human story. So if you want to tell a
Oh,
woke
and not a
story,
very interesting human
right
story
here. Yeah, yeah. And so it was
because there's no
I
depth to it. There's no
right,
reality to it, right?
absolutely.
Like some of the most so interesting, the Hatch Acts, right? And in the 70s when the Hatch Act was coming down, there was very interesting movies like The Graduate and others that were put out. But, which in their own time could have been kind of thought of as, people who've been suppressed.
Sure.
But
Absolutely.
or Raging Bull or Taxi Driver, these could have been considered as people who had been suppressed under the Hatch Act and the repression, etc. But
Yeah.
though, and rightfully so, because they were neurodivergent people. But the stories were so rich, the characters were so rich, there was so much more going on to them, and there was so much more going on with the dynamics in which they were operating than just everything's neurodivergent.
Yeah. And if you think about, the progression of Hollywood as they went on, as the technology advanced, well, look, narrative is a technology.
Oh yeah,
And,
yeah, 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 yeah.
the depth that certain movies got to, their ability to connect, got, not to say that it didn't exist in the past, but like people got pretty gosh darn good at that. Right. And then, in the last 10 years or so, we just kind of sort of forgot everything and look, part of this is also, I think that in any industry, when you enter it, and I don't care if you're an electrician or a Hollywood armor or a lawyer, you walk into those places as a young person and someone needs to like shut up and sit down. You don't know anything. Pay attention for several years before you open your mouth. Like I certainly got that speech. I went into Hollywood. I was doing a blue collar job with a pretty high level science education, and it took me a minute to realize that that counted for nothing, absolutely nothing. Because the if you, I don't care how well educated you are or how smart you are, you're not smarter than 100 years of experience. You're just not.
So we have
And
a
and even if you're smarter in this one narrow area, it's not worth changing the system to optimize that thing you saw.
saying in the Green Berets. Um, you get through the Q course that has only prepared you to become a Green Beret, and you have to spend 3 years on a team active to actually truly be respected and have earned your Green Beret. And that's true in any high-end, highly complicated domain, not just special operations.
I mean, look at black belts used to mean n- the, in many early traditions, the point of a black belt was you could perform any part of the art and any part of the art could be performed on you. Therefore, you were fit to be trained. It was
And
the
it,
beginning of the real training,
so
not arrived.
yeah, first level black belt, right, is you are now capable of becoming a master. It doesn't
Yeah,
make you a master, right? And each substantive level, going to showdown and et cetera, all the way up, each substantive level is like an eigenvalue step up in
yeah,
capacity. Well, that's the same in any, highly complex, highly involved profession, including the profession of making movies or
sure.
TV shows or, serials or even the music industry, etc. Um, okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Um, You've got some interesting stories about, so I kind of understand the beginning of Hollywood, maybe not the early vaudeville stuff, but I remember the early Hollywood, which was Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel and, and this going into this farmland, ranch land in the San Gabriel Valley there to, because the land was cheap and didn't have a lot of water. And so, it was a cheap, low cost place to go, but it had the beaches and et cetera. And the mob invested in Hollywood in the 1920s to reputation wash the mob. And look at the early movies and movie stars, and most of them, many of them were either pirates or swashbucklers or straight up mobsters. Well, that
Yeah,
was done on purpose, and then the merging of the high end law enforcement and intelligence community and the mob started in prohibition and then just really took off in the 1940s. Well, 1930s, 38, 39 with the propaganda that was trying to get us into the war. And then the propaganda that was made through the war. And then after it just took off. But you have some
yeah.
interesting stories about later periods of how this integration between the intelligence community, narrative crafting, right? So maybe you touch upon some of that.
Sure. So, in my own career, again, from a blue collar perspective, um, I was on a couple of shows that had DoD reps there because if you want to borrow military equipment, they want to have a say in what your movie looks like. And so, all through there was an office in the Pentagon that dealt with nothing but requests from film and television to do, to 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 borrow equipment. So it's not just borrow equipment. Hey, we want to film on a military base. We want to. Could you send up an F-15 so that we can do some shots of it? Can we get on the deck of an aircraft carrier, et cetera, et cetera? And there were very strict rules about like how that would work. In fact, um, this might be different now, but when I was around, you couldn't put civilians on DoD aircraft. That's where they drew the line. It could be on the ground. You could jump on and off. You could, use it in any way you wanted, but you are not getting actors in it and flying away. And so there are a couple privately owned Blackhawks in the world. And I've worked with some of those guys because we would do all of the, the full military stuff. And then when it comes to the actual flyaway, they would come and we would rent it and do the actual flyaway. So the DoD had a interesting thumb that they could place on Hollywood depending on the messaging. And I wasn't directly involved in this, but I know that it happened because a friend of mine was. The remake of Red Dawn that they did at like I think 15 or so years ago now, originally it was the bad guys were the Chinese, right? Makes sense. That's kind of, but but then the international distribution people said, how am I supposed to sell this movie in China? And so they went in with CGI and removed all the red China symbols. So like stuff like that happens all the time. I know that in Maverick, if you go and you look at Maverick's jacket from 1985, there's a Taiwanese flag on it, and now there's not. So that was altered to make certain people happy. Um, so yeah, there are very interesting pressures that can be put on a creative person. And if you are trying to get across, let's just, shall we say, a subversive message, it doesn't take much weight on the scale or a very large directional change for your movie that you envisioned as this to turn into a movie that's actually about that. So like Top Gun's an interesting example. The director of Top Gun, do you remember the scene when Maverick and Iceman are talking in the locker room, and it's like the heavy scene where Iceman is like, "Why didn't you take care of my friend Cougar?"
Yeah.
That's the movie the director wanted to shoot. He wanted a gritty personal drama about these men and their egos clashing. That was his kind of original conception. And then Bruckheimer and Simpson said, we're making an awesome fighter pilot movie. Because guess what? If we make an awesome fighter pilot movie, we get an aircraft carrier, we get unlimited F-14 flight hours, and you get this cultural
So it's a
artifact.
Navy. If we do a Navy recruiting movie,
Yep. Then the movie is different. And so part of me would be very curious to see the Top Gun as it was originally conceived versus what it turned into. So that's just on the DoD side. That's just if you want to play with our toys, follow these rules. And then there's like, bigger questions of, okay, how much of Hollywood was being backdoor funded by, you know, parts of the United States government? How many writers were, not going to say under the control of, but just at the very least, sympathetic to certain messages from the government, etc. And don't
John
forget
Wayne
this
and the Green Berets.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. And don't forget that Hollywood was always and still is terrified of the government coming in and taking over the entire business, because it almost happened several different times. And so when you see, oh, it's a PG-13 movie, those ratings are self-policed by the industry, because if we didn't do that, the government would have come in and done it
Well,
for
so
us.
that's the continuation of the Hatch Act from the 30s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Hayes Code.
Excuse me, Hayes
Yeah.
coats. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
if you're watching Ozzy and Harriet, how come they're in separate beds? Because the Hayes Code said they had to be. Right? It's like you couldn't show drug use or alcohol use. Filmmakers were heavily constricted, and the only reason that Alfred Hitchcock movies are good is because he had to do everything within that set of limits,
And
right?
he
And so
figured
that
out how to walk the very finest
fine
line.
line, the finest line, right? And so, okay, I can't show a gruesome murder, but I can hint at it real strongly, and I can show grape juice going down a drain, you know. And so there, yeah, I don't think any of us will ever know. And by the way, I also don't think that most of the people actually involved knew how much they were being influenced in that way. I think part of it, I mean, look, just like how right now we just finished a conversation about how the current crop of elites are trapped in their phone and in these echo chambers. I think the last crop of elites were too. It was just a different set of echo chambers with a different set of people, at cocktail parties making little nudges, etc.
So
And so, yeah,
absolutely true. So let's touch upon something you said earlier and then bring it to right now, right? And that was the change from tool belts to suits,
Mhm.
right? So private equity started to get involved in the 80s. And then interestingly, there was all these producers that showed up who had money from corporate jobs.
Mm.
I might know a couple. I might be up in northern Idaho here in a week or so to meet with a couple of them who have questionable um, how much did you make as a executive for what major corporation, and how do you have that to be in the movie industry, and how do you know the right? So talk a little bit more about the change from the tool belts to the suits on a kind of maybe a broader, this was a maybe a hijacking, not a hijacking, but maybe it was an indirect way of the very thing you talked about, the concern of government taking over, that maybe this was a way of government taking over, but through the private equity, and, the private producer that I just got an email in from him earlier today, but I'm a, minor figure in a couple movies actually that I helped some people with. And there's a website, I can't remember what it is, a service, right? And I can't remember, again, terribly sorry, people, my memory's horrible, but there's a whole slew of producers who showed up who were not the traditional producers starting in the 80s, who were corporate executives who had excess money. If you look at their corporate careers, though, and where they were assigned as corporate executives, you wonder who they really worked for. So maybe you touch a bit about that transition from tool belts to suits and kind of how you see that played out to this very day.
Sure. So I told my little story about seeing the tool belts. Preceding that, as a younger man, my dad was a mid-level executive at Warner's when the AOL merger happened,
Hmm.
and that was kind of the first time that tech came in and started, kind of throwing its weight around, shall we say. Didn't last very long or go very well, but that was, I guess, you could say Sony, right? But Sony was like a consumer electronics company, not tech in the way that we currently know it. But I mean, so right there, Hollywood was a very interesting prize, I think, in the sense that they were, like Gulf and Western bought Paramount in the 70s. People had traded film studios around, but generally speaking, the people in charge were pretty willing to let the creatives do whatever they wanted, right? So without Gulf Western and you don't get The Godfather, you don't get Love Story, you don't get any of the movies of that era. But I guess as the blockbuster era of the 80s really got going, it became probably an irresistible target to all kinds of people. And I can't tell that story. Um, Look up who directed Mr. and Mrs. Smith and who his dad was. There are people who started getting into the industry who had um, very interesting backgrounds, and you end up with, you know scarily connected people in places where like, okay, this has finally come out. I can talk about this. Arnaud Milchan, producer in the 80s and 90s, actually into the 2000s. I worked on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I think was one of his last movies. He's the guy who got the nuke triggers for Israel, right? So he's neck deep in this. Um, and then that's just the ones that I know about. And from my level, um, didn't see a ton of that, but I'll tell you that real estate prices in Los Angeles do not reflect the actual amount of cash in actual circulation from actual industries, because there's no way in hell that real estate actually, there's no way that the money being made here supports what real estate costs.
So for anybody who is paying attention or listening, my mother lived next to the Lucille Ball when she was a little girl down in Bel Air in the 50s, in the late 50s, and moved up to Atherton, California when grandfather was investing in tech. Um, my mother had some very interesting stories from back in the 50s and 60s. And then when she was young, 60s and 70s, both there in the LA area, because not everything's in LA for people who want to nitpick, right? Um, but, in the San Gabriel Valley and Orange County and et cetera. And then there was very close connections on the money side and the overlap with people with very interesting job titles in the corporate world between, the Hollywood circle, the entertainment circle larger, and Silicon Valley. And people might want to look into that, talking about how tech later comes back and takes over.
That's
A lot of
an
those
interesting.
people went from Hollywood and industry, and then they went up to back and fund. The same people went up in the same funds and the same banks went up to back and fund technology development in Silicon Valley.
Well, but that would have been before it was Silicon Valley, right? Wouldn't that be Microwave Valley
That
back when it was
was
all
that was
RF and satellites and that
well, it
stuff?
was farmland. It's all Fairchild Electronics, etc. But that took off from there, and it created the very technologies and the wealth that went back and took over, the entertainment industry.
Yeah,
And if you
yeah.
look at who is the major backer of that, well, it's InQtel.
Which is what, just agency VC, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then if you take a step back from there, you look at 80% or 90% of the venture capital funds and private equity funds in the United States are all backed by InQtel, and well, the early stage stuff are backed by InQtel and or some other. There's another, and again, forgive me, people, I can't remember the name of it. I used to name David Hugazian or whatever. I knew Trump's appointee to it in the first term, but there's a private equity fund, quasi government private equity funds, $50 billion now, $60 billion. And secretly, they're behind most of the angel and seed and incubator funds in the country and overseas.
No kidding. No kidding. Well, it's probably a great way to, one, see cool stuff before anyone else, and to suppress cool stuff before it has a chance
Well,
to.
yeah. So it's the initial argument for why we did all of this was that, how do you ensure in this age of technological rapid development that you're on the front line of that, knowing that there are other brilliant people out there in the world that aren't within your sphere or, aren't within your compromat or otherwise compromisable system and ways, right? Or not otherwise just loyal to you. Maybe they're loyal to your actual enemy. And so that was the argument that was made, but that's not actually how it was used. It was used to, you know, very much to you said. One, it was used to take over everything, and the other thing is how do you take over everything? When anything that might be a threat, you make sure that you get in early and you suppress it. So,
Yeah.
you know, okay. So switching gears a little bit, to me, Hollywood and its ability to identify talent that can tell compelling narratives is an absolutely essential national security asset.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and has to be for us as Americans, as and actually really as the English speaking peoples, because the British system, which used to be so good at telling stories, so unbelievably good at, with low budgets and etc., but has been totally and absolutely corrupted by continental Europe and the British, not the English, Scottish, Welsh, etc., but or the Irish. To me, we need to bring about a Hollywood 2.0. And this time, almost a century later, I mean, like literally almost exactly a century later, we need to do so, but this time without it being the child of the mob and the mob state. And as still a national security asset, it needs to be focused on how do we use all these technologies been designed and made possible that have actually destroyed Hollywood 1.0, both intentionally burning it as an asset and incidentally, right?
Sure.
How do we use that to foster and all the various revenue ways that we have now to seek out, identify, and incentivize, but not in this, malevolent, controlled way all of the storytellers amongst us. And those storytellers are not just the writers, they're not just the directors, and it's also the blue collar people. It's the people who know how to code things. It's people who know how to, like we have these, they're not so good as people think, but they're putting a lot of money and time into telling us about how good AI is. But when you look at the really high quality stuff that comes out, it's people that come out of some production company you probably knew at some point there in Hollywood, who understand all this complexity about lighting and movement and motion and all this other kind of stuff. It's not some average common Joe.
No, and I'm using AI right now as part of a consulting project that I'm doing, and it's amazing how powerful it is in certain contexts and how completely it
And
is in others.
useless,
Yeah,
unless you have
completely.
that depth of knowledge. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's storytelling is an interesting thing. Stories turn on subtlety. Eye glances and head nods and human factors,
Tone of
and getting
voice,
AI actually
lighting, motion. Yeah.
subtle,
Yeah.
subtle stuff that we have been. And look, you and I might just be victims of a lifetime of good storytelling with a particular visual language. And that's why AI looks terrible to us. Maybe you have to generate a generation who doesn't know what good storytelling looks like, or at least our version of
I
good
don't think we're going
storytelling.
to get there because the old
And look,
storytelling is there and the younger
no,
generations are turning away from the AI. They call it AI slop,
yeah.
even when it's
You know,
not.
you know what the biggest threat to Netflix right now is? All the old movies on Netflix.
Oh, well, okay. So to that, okay. Brilliant point. What is the fastest growing subset of of videos that people are watching on YouTube? Old movies. Why has YouTube done all this work to get all the old, and these aren't like big blockbuster stuff. I mean, a lot of these are movies that, weirdos like us would watch because they were good cinematic movies with good
Yeah.
stories, but they weren't the ones that people talked about around the water cooler,
Well,
right?
maybe that is the only cure for being dopamine burned out, is to slow down your storytelling. And at some level people recognize that.
So give me a second. And again, Dominic, you just triggered this, so I hadn't thought about this before, but I think the only way to deal with dopamine burnout is that you need to have a healthy dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin balance. And that's what the
Mm.
old movies the old
Ah.
entertainment and the old movies gave us, was a balanced neuroendocrine system.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. That means that all the neurological guys working for tech over optimized for dopamine, but didn't do a holistic brain picture.
Because they take cues from the pharmaceutical industry. It's called lifetime earnings, and it's like, how do you maximize how much money you can make off of somebody, knowing that you're actually killing that person?
Right. And keep them alive as long as possible.
Well, not necessarily. If you can make a lot more money, so that's the
Uh,
behavioral thing. If you can make a
where the
lot more
therapist
money off of them in a curve, yeah, it's a J curve, right, or descending
Yeah.
J curve, right? So, um, the thing that the old movies and the old music, by the way, particularly like old classic music and even old country music, etc., brought old, folk music and country music, etc., and even some of the old original rock and roll, it gave you the full neuroendocrine balanced kind of ride. You got some dopamine stuff, you got some norepinephrine stuff, you got some serotonin stuff, and oh, by the way, there's many versions of each of those. And the good, like if you listen to, Jimi Hendrix, that's not just dopamine, right? Close your eyes and listen. That's giving you the whole neuroendocrine brain hormone kind of ride. Well, go look at Apocalypse Now. That's not just a dopamine ride.
No, it's not.
You're getting the full spectrum. Okay, we're gonna take you up on the dopaminergic cycle, and then we're gonna bring you over to the norepinephrine for a moment, and then we're gonna give you into the serotonin phase, and then right. And they didn't know all that neuroscience. but they understood
No,
people, and they understood, how, human beings and human psychology really, not psychology, but neurology really works. And they realized, I want you to maybe come back to the same film or song 3, 4, 5 times, but I'm going to put some other things out later, and I want you to come to that too. I'm not trying to get all the money off of just this one by burning out one of your neural circuitries.
right. What that reminds me of is, well, two things. One is, and don't forget that these experiences were had inside of a darkened movie theater in a communal environment, right? And in that respect, they look a
Normally with
lot
somebody you really cared about and you really wanted to be there with. So there's the
right.
human part of it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Outside of the
human part,
Debbie Does Dallas theaters in San Francisco. And
right?
yeah, that was more solitary. Yeah. Anyways, terribly sorry. That was completely
Um,
inappropriate, but yeah, go ahead.
it's your show, so it's only appropriate if you say so. Um, there's an interesting saying that I've heard. It's that people don't look at movie screens; they look into them.
Through them. Yeah. Through it.
And I
Yeah.
don't think people look into phones. So, to a certain extent, maybe the reason they focused on dopamine is that that's the best they could do in that environment. Because going to a movie could, look is a lot more like a concert, or, so I think an important
Or
thing
an evening at home around the fire, listening to
around
an
the fire.
oral narrative that's being played out
Absolutely.
by the tribe.
Absolutely, right? And so yeah, that's the full brain chemical cocktail right there, right? That's something that we probably figured out a very long time ago.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, the Greeks
I
talked
think
about it 3,000 years ago. I mean, the Greeks were very aware of the theater on the drama and the comedy side. They wrote about it extensively, not just about the plays and et cetera, but about the whole concept and idea of the environment and the play and the ambiance and the introduction before, and then the post conversation, et cetera, and experience.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, many of the earliest movie theaters that were converted vaudevillian theaters, they were called movie palaces and movie temples.
Yeah, yes.
Right? And some of them still exist, right? And they're these gorgeous, ornate, amazing communal spaces that you would go into to have these experiences. And
We still have one here in Boise. It's called the Egyptian Theater. It used to be the Egyptian Palace, and it's beautiful. It's carved like, Thebes, and it's an incredible experience even today.
do you think maybe that the guy who designed that knew exactly what he was doing?
Okay, so that's a great question. I don't think he knew exactly what he was doing, but he did. He
But he
didn't know
did,
consciously. What he
right?
knew was true, full neuroendocrine, right?
Mhm.
Storytelling. And we'll go to your father, right? And your grandfather doing sets, right? And actually, my first roommate in the Army, his dad, I can't remember, Baker, I can't remember his father's first name, Fred or something, was the one that did the sets for Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh, what a great show.
And they put a lot of time, it's out in Rancho Cucamonga, right? Because that's where most of that was done. Just again, for tax reasons at the time. Couldn't even get that tax break out there now. But they put a lot of thought and energy and effort into the sets. And those
Oh,
weren't
huge.
elaborate sets like Cleopatra and Julius Caesar kind of sets. These were Star Trek sets. They were a little bit kind of dry, but they weren't so much. And
No,
they
there
put
was
so much effort and time into the subtlest little lighting, fabrics, the shading, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and even sets that were used again and again and again, which ended up in Vegas, by the way. And I did that experience with one of my top attorneys 20 some odd years ago. Um, I remember Todd, my roommate, talking about his dad, and Todd was remember the band Oingo Boingo?
I do.
Todd was a good friend of Oingo Boingo, and he was
Yep.
original drummer, guitarist with the band, and he didn't stick with them and didn't make it, etc. But um, I remember the conversations. I met his father one time, and it was astounding how this guy, who was a set guy, how much he understood the overall storytelling. Right? To him, it wasn't just building this static thing. He was involved in the narrative. He was involved in the presentation of this very rich and this is the 90s, late, the 80s and 90s. But he was involved, very intimately involved as the set guy in this very rich dialogue and conversation that he was having with the wardrobe people and the directors and the actors themselves, because later they all, as actors in series get later on involved in the in the creative side of things more, etc. So,
And don't forget that he was doing it for 16 hours a day.
and he was doing it 16 hours a day, and he was doing it 7 days a week, and he was doing it for like 26 weeks or 28 weeks a year.
Yep. The immersion of that, I think, is a part of that. When I worked on House, 16-hour days. I think I understand Sherlock Holmes' story in a way that I don't even understand, because that's what that show was.
Yeah.
And so how could you be on it for 16 hours a day and not absorb something?
Well,
I think that
not yourself become part of the story.
yeah. No, it's a good point.
Right. So that's the
Point.
thing about what was the original entertainment
Wow.
industry. All of the blue collar people were actually engaged in the story. You were part of the story because you were yourself in your own ways acting it out, just the same as the actors on that under the lights and the camera.
That you just gave your audience the end of Never Ending Story.
Oh, I love that movie. I love that
And
movie.
that's the princess's speech to Sebastian, telling him exactly you were in the story the whole time.
Oh, Dominic, I never made that connection till just now with the richness of this, right? I heard it. I love that movie, by the way. I think it's one of the greatest stories ever told, right?
Pretty good.
But I never made the connection to that right now. But okay, so what does this mean? Why has Hollywood failed? Why is the entertainment industry dead? Because all of these, 10 to 1, 20 to 1 blue collar people are no longer part of the story.
Absolutely.
And so now you don't actually have a story.
You don't have a story anymore, right? The Hollywood should have gone out and recruited veteran writers.
Yes.
Hollywood
Writers who were veterans is what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
writers. In the summer of 21, there should have been $5 movie tickets across America for the entire summer with a free Coke, and they should have said, "Welcome back to the movies." And they didn't need to put out new movies.
And they should have also not just tried for new movies. They should have re-released some movies they knew really connected with certain demographics.
Absolutely, right. And start bringing your kids.
Yes.
It was quite the missed opportunity.
Yeah, but that's because it was all fucking MBAs at that point.
Well, okay. Yes, but it was also like really, really ideological. And
well, that came with that batch of MBAs, right? That came with that batch of MBA, because Larry Fink had put out his letter in whatever 2011, 2012 about social responsibility, and that was all a setup. And that was all set up through Wharton and Harvard and Stanford, et cetera, and USC's business schools. That what does that social responsibility mean? Well, you're going to get a certain rating, you're going to get a certain preference in the stock markets if you find ways to introduce these concepts and ideas. Well, Hollywood, the entertainment industry writ large, has been driven by capital, by producers with money, and often by syndicates of money, syndicated, portfolios of money. And that's still that way because these things are expensive and they're not things that any one individual can afford. And the ones that tried it, too many of them have failed.
Yeah, you only get a few swings at bat when it's 100 million at $100 million a pop.
How many movies did John Wayne actually produce that were successful?
I don't know.
Not very many.
Not very many.
So many of the biggest stars that tried to go out on their own and produce their own movies failed, because there's this whole other business side of it, right? There's this whole other money-making side of it that's required, that you got to go out to the public and you got to go out and compete with all these interests. I will say something that interests me now. Terribly sorry, I'm on a little bit of a tangent here, but not necessarily. I'm very interested in Damon and Affleck's kind of model.
Yeah,
Um,
correct.
right. I don't know how successful it is. I don't know how much of that is just, window. I know they're both genuine about it. Okay. So there's no question of that. But I don't know how much the industry is serious about the model they're trying to do where everybody on the production benefits kind of Silicon Valley like, from some portion of the success. I think it's what
Well,
has to happen, but yeah,
it's certainly an interesting mechanism, right? And look, what happens when those two guys have all of the talent because the talent decides that they're going to throw their, like the Hollywood crews got screwed pretty hard. I mean, a lot of people in their peak earning years of their lives don't have anything to do. So, Hollywood was a patronage system. I think that's another important part of this story. It was absolutely positively a patronage system.
it was
Multi-generation,
nobility. It was a
right? Yeah.
nobility system that had a very substantive patronage that would cross generations, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Terribly sorry, Dominic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And that's broken. Like,
Oh yeah.
Hollywood's greatest asset was never the buildings, it was never even the technology, it wasn't even the talent. It was the phrase, "The show must go on."
And it
That
will. And it will.
and
Yeah.
and that got more stuff done in the rain, in the snow, and in the dark than, that was
Well,
by far the most valuable thing Hollywood had, and it is officially gone.
well, it was also the thing that created the greatest innovations. Because some
Absolutely.
camera guy, some lighting guy, some called a friend of theirs or had drinks with a friend of theirs as a physicist or whatever, and they worked out, or as a chemist and worked out some chemistry for some film, or you
Absolutely.
know, some mechanical engineer that worked out some movement or something, right? Or a behavioral, or it was a producer and a director trying to figure out how to get some actor or actress into exactly the right place. And so they went out and had some drinks or dinner with a behavioral scientist and, and maybe an artist and, had a conversation about how humans really work. Right? Now, increasingly since the 90s, we think that our
Yep.
machines are doing all that. Our computers have all that coded now.
Nope. Well, look, most of the things that really mattered were happened behind the scenes. They were never published. They were relayed. They were things spoken over, a campfire and a drink.
Correct.
That's that's
Up in one
where
of the
men,
valleys on a
yep,
on a Saturday night or Friday night. Yeah.
that's where all the truth was,
Yeah.
right? And then
Or
after the fact, you tell the story about how, oh, it was this and it was that. It's like, no, it was never that.
no, it wasn't.
It was
No, it was
never
two
that.
people on an airplane that accidentally met on their way to Tangier because they were both right. Yeah, I mean, my mother, I didn't grow up there. I didn't grow up in that whole scene, et cetera. But my mother told me stories when she was young and the interesting conversations they had, and then things would come out later. And right, so okay, so give me 1 second. You and I have to this very point of the conversation. You and I have spoken before about the fact that we are not because we want to, but there is this huge push to hand over expertise to the machine, but we are prematurely transitioning away from humans to the machine because there's this vast body of knowledge from high-end directors all the way down to the lowest boom operator in studios that is being lost that the machine does not know and will never know unless we figure out how to monetize the knowledge and expertise that we have such that it interfaces with the machine for the years that knowledge and expertise needs to earn a living and retire, etc. Otherwise, the machine is never going to learn it. When I say the machine, I mean that as this larger thing, and we are going to lose. And this is not just a thing in the entertainment space. This is a thing across the entire boomer and older Xer generation.
Yep, for sure.
There is this unbelievable base and depth of knowledge that the machine doesn't know fuck all about, no matter how smart and how well trained that machine is.
One of the things that I thought about recently was that, okay, you could train an AI on the corpus of movies, right? But that movie is a final product. And that movie could have been 50 different movies. And it wasn't because of taste,
Or it could have gone
right?
through 3 directors, 5
Sure.
producers, 7 or 8 different, crew changes to actually get, and who knows, untold number of edits to get to that
Right.
final product. And none of that is captured.
Is captured, right? It's odd for me always to watch movies I've worked on because I will have seen 20 takes of something, but only one of them is presented. Man, maybe not even the one that I thought was good, just maybe the one that was, that's not my movie. It's a director's movie. He can
Yeah,
pick whichever
yeah,
one
yeah.
he wants. But but that's an interesting thing to think about, right? Which is that how could you train an athlete if he only ever wins games?
Okay, let's do this. How do you train the coach of the athlete if none of the support staff are there to talk to the coach about what they see?
Sure. Sure.
How many times have people like, and when I say people like you, I don't mean that, I mean like, how many
What do you mean,
times,
you people?
you people, you people, you Italians, right? How many times has the working class subtly, directly, sometimes not so subtly, actually impacted the white collar folks that everybody knows about in unbelievably demonstrable ways that change the entire direction of the thing?
Yeah.
It's way
Well,
more than people think. In
it's way more
fact,
than people.
it's what's created the entire modern world. Because I'm going to tell you quite directly, having done PhD studies and having come from a certain level of society and having studied things, the course corrections never come from the top. They come from the people. And then the top hears that, and then they figure out that's right, and then they enact it. They make sure it happens. But the course corrections, John Ford, the greatest people that we think about, even some today, Steven Spielberg, et cetera, George Lucas, et cetera, if you really talk to them, they will tell you about sometimes some, blue collar person said something to them about something, some aspect of something, and they were like, that's right. Thank you. Whether they said thank you or not is, in fact, most of those guys at that level, they do say thank you, right? But
Yeah.
so much of the world that we live in today that the machine doesn't understand is based off of some decision maker was listening to some non-decision maker, some skilled person with years of experience, or just an insight that was absolutely right. And the machine will never understand that.
Well, you and I have talked about the kind of the idea of the officer corps versus the NCO corps, cloud people, dirt people.
Yeah.
Um,
Tree
you
monkeys
know,
versus mud monkeys, my
yeah.
former third group CIA buddy and I say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that that there are very, very, very few human beings who have the cognitive breadth to master a hands-on craft and be a highly abstract, creative decision maker, politician type, right? Like we bifurcate into different groups for different cognitive reasons. And so, yeah, the people who end up in positions of power for various reasons, they need some type of grounding in the way that the world really works, right? And because of you, I did a deep dive onto Shannon and information
Oh,
technology,
wonderful.
and
Yeah.
the idea that a piece of information only encodes information if it's novel. If it doesn't violate baseline, it actually doesn't contain information. And so
It's a null
I
void.
think,
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's so like when we start talking about communications in an organization, let's take like a film crew. A film crew is it's stratified, but it's a very flat organization. Film crews are kept at about the actual working crew is kept at about 100 people, right in that Dunbar number area. Um, and I think that that's one of the reasons why it works is that, yeah, if you can go up to the director sometimes and go, hey, just so you know, problem.
Well, let's let's add to that. Let's not, change or take away from it. But the decision maker, the thought leader, can't be everywhere at all times and can't see all things. And so a lot of times the information that is shared is not some, improved guidance. Sometimes it's just a piece of information that the thought leader, the decision maker didn't have. Maybe the director didn't know that such and such actor or actress is going through such a thing right now, or
Yep.
that such and such a person on the support crew is dealing with this or this right now. And so again, this goes back to things that the machines will never be able to understand, is the human aspect of, there are these subtle little pieces of information that the thought leader or decision maker, and even some of the key players, not even the top people, need to have. Like sometimes an actor or an actress needs a piece of information on somebody that they don't know, so that they can get into that space. They can understand, okay, yes, we're playing a character, but this person in real life is dealing with this. So how can I help them deal with that so that we can get into this space?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So
You know what that reminds me? Okay.
yeah, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
That reminds me of a Mel Brooks story that I love.
Oh, I love Mel Brooks. Love Mel Brooks. Yeah.
So on the early days, he's working in television, right? And Mel Brooks invented, like, have you ever seen like behind the scenes footage of a live taping, and there's a sign that lights up that says applause, and there's another one that says laugh.
Yeah.
And as the story goes, Mel is giving a tour to someone of the stage. There's no one there at the time. And they say, "Why is there a sign up there that says laugh?" And Mel says, "So the audience knows when to laugh." Like, do you know how brilliant of an insight that is?
Yes.
That having a sign that says laugh and a sign that says applause actually makes the whole damn thing work.
Makes it work.
Because it's not
more
that
importantly, it's more importantly, it's that while we respect and understand the audience, they might not all get the context of where we are in the story. And we want to get that, and we want to get, it's not so much that on the production side, we want to get the audience there.
We want to give them permission.
Yes.
It's permission to laugh. And look.
That's very good, actually, by the way. That's very good. Give them permission. Yep. It's okay to laugh. This is laughable.
Okay to laugh.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to Mel Brooks' work, by the way. Yeah.
And now it's communal, right?
Yeah.
It's communal, all laughing at the same time.
And now we're a community because we did this thing together, and now we're a community. Now we're in this. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Sorry, Dominic. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, these are all technologies, right? You wouldn't think that a sign that says laugh is a critical piece of technology to filming a live television show. And it is. And when an AI invents that, I'll be impressed.
So what is the most unbelievably complex piece of technology in the history of the human species?
The brain?
No, that's hardware. Technology, it's humanity. Being human.
Oh, fair. Right.
Being truly human amongst all this complexity is the most sophisticated technology, right? And this gets to Chomsky's work. I mentioned this with Roxanne the other day. And again, I'm not a big fan of Chomsky's later stuff, but his early linguistic work is bar none brilliant, genius. Like Claude Shannon, you mentioned earlier, everybody should go back and read Chomsky's early work on linguistics, probably in the first, 10, 12 years of his work, right? After that, he was an expert and they pumped him up and all that to get him to support their things. But in his early work, on linguistics and, levels of linguistics, et cetera, is absolutely brilliant. One of the articulations he made very early on is that human spoken language is the most data compressed, rapid communication technology that will ever be. Because I can say a word red. Done. How quick did I say that? Millisecond? But it will unpack in your mind in a probabilistic space petabytes of information. until I
Right.
give another word or another couple words in milliseconds that will then further give you the context for which red and which aspect and concept and idea or whatever. It could be a red dress, could be a shade of red, could be something that's not red at all, but is articulate. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Chomsky articulated something that stuck. I read this paper when I was actually fairly young. I was not quite a teen or just a teen. This paper's impacted me this whole time that, human speech is the most data compressed, data rapid transmission of data that is possible in the universe. We cannot do it with even photonic transmissions, quantum signaling, etc., because the human brain and the human being is a quantum computational resource already. And these things have developed over eons of time. So, back to the conversation, there is this vast amount of rich information that Hollywood and the entertainment industry not so very long ago used to communicate that no machine is ever going to be able to match. Ever.
Yeah.
And more importantly, if we don't figure out how to revive the human in the industry of Hollywood, we are going to lose 10 centuries, 10 millennia of this, in constantly improving human technology, which is our ability to communicate and tell stories. Because our stories tell the reality of existence in life in ways that and I'll say this, I haven't done PhD studies in engineering. I could read 10,000 papers on a subject. I could go down to a local bar and talk about some hick that knew some shit about it, and he'd tell me more about that than all 10,000 papers could over a beer or 6 or 12.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't assume for a split second that all the knowledge that matters made it into the training model.
Or more importantly, that the knowledge that really mattered wasn't cut out of the training model on purpose. Right?
Yeah.
So we're getting on here a little bit, and let's touch on one final thing a little bit, and then we can come back and have another conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time, and please let the major know that I'm grateful for the time this evening.
I will.
I believe very fundamentally that something we have to do, some of us have to do, is that we need to create Hollywood 2.0, and we need to go back to the old original Hollywood, but this time without the mafia and later CIA. And we need to go back to humans telling human stories. And to do that, of course, we need to use the machine to help us, cost offset and enrich some things and et cetera. But I believe very fundamentally that we need to create Hollywood 2.0 for two reasons. One is national security. A people that cannot tell real stories is not a people. And they are undone from inside and without very quickly and easily. The second reason, and you need to be able to counter the narratives and stories of the people who can still tell a story.
Right.
Right? Okay. The other reason is that we need to harness the immense capacity. So what did the entertainment industry do before it all went to the suits and the MBAs and automation? It employed millions of creative people. And not all of them were painters or writers or music. But no. Some of these creative people were the very people in your family. You're a creative guy. You were doing props, right? If I'm not mistaken, you mostly did props, but the way in which you did the props made them more than just the prop itself.
Sure.
Right? The way in which you helped articulate how it fit into the story and how it was directly, all of it, and which one it was. Okay, so point I'm getting at is that there is this vast amount of creativity that is necessary amongst the people that you have to figure out how you monetize it and fund it so that those creatives can earn a living and can continue to be creative. And not all those creatives are the obvious, sculptors, painters, et
Sure.
cetera. A lot of them are actually engineers, innovators, and software coders. They're the non-sexy kind of people who, to your point, figured out how the show goes on. And we need all of these people, and we need an industry that employs all of these people. And it's millions of people, by the way, millions. And so we can't, yes, I agree. We got to get away from the big blockbusters, and we got to get away from the $20 million per picture freaking stars and all of that. Now, I don't begrudge them that they made that money, but we could have had 20 other stars at $1 million a piece who were a voice
Yeah.
and a creative out there in the world.
And don't forget, those stars commanded that money because of a pre-existing body of work and the trust of the audience that built and built and built and built and built. And it's you were paid that money because we trusted you.
So give me 1 second. I played football when I was in high school. I love football. I know a lot of my boys that played football in college. Some of them even went to the NFL. None of them watch football anymore, or baseball or basketball or whatever their sport was, because when they were playing it for the love of the game. And some of them made some money, but now kids are getting $200 million contracts and they couldn't
Not the
give a
same
fuck
game.
about the game.
Right.
Right. So, back to this. I don't know exactly how to do it. You and I have talked about it numerous times. I'm sure we'll do some more of these. We'll talk about it more, but we as an American people, and then thereby the English speaking peoples, need to revision Hollywood. And we need to not just let it be this, pile of ash that was intentionally burned as an institution. And we cannot surrender it to the machine, because that is the loss. When we lose the ability to tell stories that tell us who we are and what we are and help us remember that in the hard times, then we actually stop being human. And then we die and we're gone. So,
Yeah.
there's this narrow window of time in which we need to figure out, how do we create Hollywood 2.0 with all the tools and the revenue streams and all that kind of stuff that we have now, but do so in such a way that we capture this immense body of subtle knowledge that is immensely profound about how we tell stories. And not just how do we verbally or, AI prompt, et cetera, but how do we mechanically, structurally, economically, marketing, positioning, all these ways that we tell real stories. That, because why? What are these stories? They are our myths.
Yep.
They are our myths, like Better Off Dead with Cusack. Even the Smiths, right? The movie you worked on. These are myths. Snatch.
Yeah. Great
Lock,
movie.
Stock, Two Smoking Barrels. Even the even the some of the big budget ones, right? But less the Avengers, etc. But I think the two Maverick movies, those are myths. Those are military myths. Those are like some of the greatest, military myths. So
the definition of a myth is something that never happened but always was.
It's a thing that happened, but it happened in component pieces amongst many different people, never that single individual altogether as a whole. But that person represent a composite summation of a subset of us and a concept and idea amongst us. So we can't lose all of this, or we quite literally lose humanity and we lose our civilization, and then we're gone.
Once upon a time, the Hollywood studios used to own the actual movie houses,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was a I forget if it was a court decision or a law passed that says you can't do that anymore. That's monopolistic. That's vertically integrating an industry, and you're not allowed to do that. And it sure seems to me that Amazon and Apple and Netflix are doing exactly that. They are producing it and they are distributing it, and it would only take the will to bust those monopolies up.
Or we outcompete them,
No. Or we outcompete them.
right? Because the thing about monopolies is so inductive reactance, capacitance, and resistance. People they can all look that up themselves. I won't explain it too much. But all things work like electrical currents, electromagnetic currents. And the greater the current that you're trying to pass through something, the greater the inductance, inductive reactance, inductive capacitance, and the resistance that you get. And so it's not always that you seek to destroy a monolith. It decays and destroys itself because nobody wants it anymore. It's not
Yeah.
human. So we have to figure out nobody wants the big, massive stories anymore. What people want, they want a million little stories, but they're stories that connect. And I'm going to, as we close out here, I'm going to use one that's close to you. And you rode your bike by there not too long ago. One of the most impactful little stories in my entire life, probably a good reason why I'm actually alive through a very dark period of my life. And that's Valley Girl. Simple little story.
A little story.
About, some hippie girl, right? Some punker guy. And that story impacted me so much, it saved my life. What do our kids need? What do the young need today? This is what they need. They're not getting what they need. They're not getting the little Valley Girl at 1 a.m. on TBS, right? That I saw in northern Idaho, coming through a very dark period. They're not getting these kinds of things. They're getting the big production, the big, right? Or they're getting the little TikTok fucking dopamine attacks. And Valley Girl was like, I don't remember. It was like less than $4 million to make or something. It might have been a lot less than that. Yeah.
Nothing. At the time, nothing.
Nothing. Right? So we need to figure.
And yet here we are talking about it decades
40
later.
some odd years later. Right? The other one didn't connect me so much, but the generation after, the millennials, was Raising Arizona. Also Nicolas Cage. Also a very low budget movie. Right?
Yeah, when someone has something to say and they know how to say it, ultimately this is what you're saying, which is that there are people who have things to say that are worth hearing. And Hollywood's job, in one sense, now granted, the technology was mass market, it was, one to many. How do we get that same effect today? And that's an
I
open question.
want to quibble with you a little bit, right? That this was the beauty of the studios, is that the studios had their own market, multiple markets within, but the different studios had different markets also. And
That's true.
When all this broke down is when there was a consolidation of the studios, right? Because then that collapsed markets together as if they were a monolithic market. And it turns out, no, Fox had its own audience. Paramount had its own audiences. Columbia had its own audiences. MGM had its own audiences.
And its own stars.
And their own stars and their own storytellers and their writers and their production crews and their producers. And
that would be a very interesting thing to know, to go back to that time and say, that I would never have thought that someone would be a fan of a particular studio's vibe, right? But of course they were.
But of course they were.
Right? Yeah, we just weren't there to feel it the way they felt it.
Well, you're maybe not old enough. I'm old enough. I'm getting close to 69. I had my 59th a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago. Who knows? It's all running together now. But recently, I had my 59th birthday. Thank you. I'm old enough to remember the different studios, and I'm old enough to remember the different vibe between them. And I tell you, because I've been watching on YouTube, interestingly, because I couldn't watch them when I was a kid because we didn't have TV. we didn't have electricity for years. But I'm watching some of the old Johnny Carson shows from, the 70s and 80s, and you can tell the vibe difference when a different actor is coming in to tell the story of a different movie from a different studio.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can
Interesting.
almost tell the studio that did the production of whatever movie they're doing. Now, there's still the actor, so there's still the person, but they're telling the narrative of the story about, whatever. So, point is that when we allowed the consolidation of studios amongst one another, it collapsed communities together that were actually very different and had very unique aspects of the way in which stories were told.
That's a very interesting thought.
And we have to undo that. And we're not going to be able to do it by breaking the studios back apart.
No, no. Well, but something that I've been thinking about recently, I think that if you're interested in this topic, it's worth a little bit of a dive into vaudeville.
Yeah.
And because that was as central to American entertainment in its time as movies were to our time.
Well, there wouldn't be
And
movies if, yeah. Movies came
nope,
directly out of, Charlie
directly out of
Chaplin,
that.
Buster Keaton. Yeah. Terribly sorry.
All,
Yeah.
all those guys. And there were have you ever heard the term make it in the big time?
Yeah.
That's a vaudevillian term.
Uh,
There were small time circuits, medium time circuits, and big time circuits. And so you would go to one of these theaters and there would be a singer, a dancer, an acrobat, or whatever. And that's where the very first movies were screened as just another piece of entertainment. And even then, the performers were mad at each other when they would go in front of the camera because they made their living going from city to city to city on these circuits. And now you perform once and it can be shown multiple different places. And most of those, like a lot of your early actors were vaudevillians. And then what happened was, which I think is equally important and something for us all to consider, is the concept of the Nickelodeon, which were, Nickelodeon is nickel. You would go and put a nickel in a machine and be able to watch a small movie. And so if you kind of think about that as a model, something vaudevillian, something Nickelodeon like, if you think about them as experiments, they are running experiment after experiment after experiment to try to see what the audience responds to. And, if there is going to be a Hollywood 2.0, it's going to be that kind of experimentation that tells us, because like, I don't think, I mean, they're tearing movie theaters down. I don't think we're going to build new ones.
no, but
No,
some
but
will last. You and I talked about
I,
this earlier. Carrying on exactly what you're saying, what was the glory days of the movie industry? It was the 1950s and 60s, and it really was the boomer generation. And they were watching serials and
yeah,
newsreels. And, there was, so when they spent their 25 to 75 cents or $1.50 later and et cetera, they were getting a whole experience for 2.5 hours. It wasn't one movie,
the
one massive
mo-
big budget production.
movies were blue collar entertainment. That's what movies were. And part of the problem is when you have $25 movie tickets and food service, like theaters right before COVID, theaters were all going luxury, right? A luxury type experience. And I don't think it's at all an accident that that's when they died. Just like how the Empire State Building, they broke ground right before the Depression started. Like your all of your tallest buildings are planned right before the economic collapse. Your highest valuations are right before. Like,
Well,
I
it's the
think the
same
same
with
thing.
muscle cars and then the OPEC freaking, right? Yeah. All right. Dominic, I love the conversation. I'm very grateful.
Always.
I really want to, you know, you and I, we talk about this offline and we've been talking about this for a year or so, but Hollywood 2.0 is a thing that really has to happen for a whole number of reasons. Um, what does it mean though? Fundamentally is we need to go back to the early entertainment what are we doing? We are entertaining, and we need to go back to that because humans haven't changed from that. And then we have to figure out with the modern tools and monetization methods, how do we make it work?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it'll be an it's there's definitely a way to do it. I don't think anyone knows what that is yet, and I don't think that the audience is ready yet for what that will be, because they still have to figure out the lie of streaming and and
I
TikTok.
will say this though, that's happening, right?
Yeah,
If we look at the number of people canceling their streaming subscriptions and et cetera, it's, realistically, it's how do we get to Gen Z and the younger millennials who are on TikTok?
yeah.
And then how do we
Well,
get
yeah,
them out of that dopaminergic system and get them into the dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin system? And we
I
might
think
actually have to do it initially through TikTok, right?
yeah. Well, look, in the good news category, the Harry Potter series that came out is now has more negative reviews than positive reviews, and it's still a year away. So people, I think, have finally, because Harry Potter was the last existing IP that hadn't been destroyed. Yeah, right.
Franchise. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that people still trusted, and now they don't.
Well,
And
actually,
that's
Lord of the Rings was the other one until Amazon bought it and
yep,
yeah,
of course, right? Yeah,
yeah.
Wheel of Time. Well, the Wheel of Time's the one that broke my heart. I love that series.
Mm,
But yeah,
yeah.
I think that there are, like you said, there are some very interesting signals that that worm is turning.
It's time. It's just, how do we do it?
Yeah.
How do we do it? All right, my friend, you guys have a great night, right?
You too.
Much
This was
respect and
awesome. Thank you.
appreciation, and we'll carry on this conversation.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yep.
Later, man.
Cheers.
Bye.